To convert our jQuery FAQ page to vanilla JavaScript, the first thing that we are going to do is take the actual link to the jQuery code file and get rid of that because we no longer need that to function in our project. So it is gone. We have destroyed that and made that go away. So now if I save this and go over and look at my page, I'll see that I have an error. That error is $ is not defined because I no longer have jQuery running on my page. I'll also see that my answers are now visible. So then that's kind of ugly. So I need to take care of that as well and make them go away. So the same steps that we followed in building it with jQuery are going to be the same steps that we follow building it without jQuery. Is we'll break it down one thing at a time. First, we're going to work on making the answers go away. Once the answers can go away, then we'll make the questions clickable. Then when they're clickable, we can make something show up. And then when we click on it again, we can work on making it go away. So we're going to follow the same workflow and process that we did previously as part of it. Looking at the rest of it, I can leave this code in. I can just comment it out if I want to use it as a visible reference to what I have done in the past or how I have done it, so that I could go with that if I feel so inclined. So it's not a bad idea to take what's there and just comment it out. Now I can save it, go back, and now the error message is gone, but my page has no interactivity into it. That's the big part that jQuery allows us to do, is to build in that user experience interactivity that makes something richer and more interesting to look at. Because from a functional standpoint, this is a completely functional page. I see questions, I see answers, so if someone goes to this page, they can get what they need. That should always be the first driving concern when you're building content, is that we should be able to get the content properly. Everything else is icing on the cake. It can make it richer, more interesting, more engaging, but if I can't get the content, it's broken. Now, one thing that we are going to want to do to this is we're just going to add a little bit of extra CSS that we will start working with as our page grows and expands. One of those is we're going to set the overflow property for the answers. So these are the paragraphs. And we'll set their overflow to hidden. So we don't want, when we've made the box that the text goes into, when we end up shrinking it down, we don't want to be able to see that text. We don't want a scroll bar to appear up, so we need to set hidden in. The next element that we're going to put into that is we're going to take advantage of using CSS as a way to build in our animation. So to get it to slide up and slide down, JavaScript doesn't have a built-in function for slide up, slide down. But CSS does have a built-in animation. And if I change a CSS property through JavaScript, we will get to see an animation take place. So I'm going to set in transition, we'll just say all, and I'll say over the course of 0.3 seconds. So I'll take a third of a second for any property that I animate. Now the properties that we're able to see animate through transitions are numerical based properties. So things that have position information like a pixel location on screen, or size information because that's based on numbers, or opacity, that would be the color. Opacity is measured 0 to 1, so we can set it that way. If we're setting our color using numerical values like RGB values, 0 to 255, those become animatable as well. So we have a lot of options that we can work with just by simply using transitions. We don't even have to use animation and keyframes or anything more complex than just simply transition. The final property that I am going to set is going to be my ease. And I wanted to ease in, so I'll start out slow and then go a little bit faster as the animation takes place. Now, if you're curious about any of these, you just type in CSS transition into Google. It will pull you to reference pages on MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network, or on W3 Schools and a host of other places. So you can get a lot more background into all the options that are available to you. So if you don't know quite the syntax, look it up. jQuery, the first thing it did was hide all of the answers. So if I want to hide all of the answers, I need to figure out how to gain access to those answers. Now, JavaScript has a variety of different ways that we can gain access to things. So we can get elements by tag name, we can get elements by ID, we can get elements using query selector and query selector all, which is the methods I'm choosing to use here. Query selector and query selector all are the two more current or popular ways of accessing things. But if you use get by tag name or get by ID, that would be okay as well. So, get by tag name and get by ID, get by class name. So all of these work, but query selector is just, at this point, as close to easy of jQuery as using jQuery. So I'm going to set a variable constant, and I'm going to call it main. And I'll say document.query selector, and inside quotes I will say main. So this is going to grab our main element of our page. I'm going to make another constant. This time I'm going to say questions will be equal to main dot query selector all, and I'm going to grab all my H2s. My H2s are all of the questions. So when I look up here, an H2 is a question. And then finally, I will say const answers is going to be equal to main dot query selector all. And this time, I want to grab the paragraphs. Now, those paragraphs, each paragraph exists inside a section. Now, I could simply, in this document, if I just said P, this would work perfect and fine. But on most pages, you have paragraphs occurring in a variety of sections on your document. Now, query selector all, if we go and look up the documentation on it, it tells us that it uses selectors for elements in the same way that we do with a CSS rule. So I can now say I want to grab it out of section P. So it grabs every section that has a paragraph in it. It's going to grab that because that's the answers on my document. So that's a safer way than just simply grabbing all of the P's on it. The answers go away. We're going to cycle through all of these answers. So when I said const answers equals main query selector all P, that actually returned my 5 answer paragraphs. That's what it returns. So if I just log this out, let's see what I get. Now if I go over here, I will see that it logged out those 5 answers, those 5 paragraphs. So it's returning a group of elements. So I want to iterate over or cycle over all of those pieces and apply something to them. And what I can do to do that, I'll just comment that out. What we can do to run through all of these is I can say answers dot for each answer, and then I'll use an arrow function and then create an anonymous function here, and I will say I want to set the style property of opacity to 0. Now if I look at this, I'll see that they disappear, but they're still taking up space on screen. So we have to fix that. But progress. If we can make progress, we're good. So what for each does is it now says for every item or element in this array, do what's in here, and now answer, I'm just creating this is a shorthand way of creating a reference to a variable, so, or that item within the array. It's style we're setting it. So we have previously set styles directly with JavaScript. We're doing it again right now. Now, if you don't like seeing answer here and it says answer as the class because you're like, well, wait, that's the same thing, you could change it to item, which I think it, oh, my log, let me just put the log back. So that is now each one of these items. I'm cycling through it, and I'm setting its opacity to 0. So if you like the word item there instead of answer, you know, if that helps your brain to kind of make sense out of it, that's all good. Property I'm going to set to make it go away. I'm going to set the style property of max height equal to 0. Now what max height is if you haven't looked at it, it's a way to find out what is the kind of the bounding box size of this element. And we're now telling the element through CSS it has no height. So we made it go invisible, opacity 0, and now we say it has no height. And when we say it has no height, if we look at it, now it's been collapsed onto the page and isn't taking up room anymore. So now we're in pretty good shape. But with JavaScript now we've accomplished the same thing as using height. We're using a numerical value, so we'll be able to animate it down the road. Looking at our jQuery next, we had our click event that we were working with, so we're going to then work on adding in a click event to each one of our questions. So with this, we're going to go through the different questions and assign a click event to each question. To assign the click event to each question, I'm going to use for each once again, so we can say questions dot for each question. And in this instance, I really do want to keep using the word question, but not like that. Set question as my variable. Use an arrow function. And now, what I want to do with each question is to say question dot add event listener, and then inside parentheses we are listening for the click event, and that's in quotes, and then we name a function that we are going to be calling. So what this does is it takes my questions array, all of the questions on the page that it found using query selector all h2, and for each one of those questions we're going to tell that question to listen for a click event, and when a click happens we're going to call the function click on. Now the function click on will simply be a basic function. We'll first verify it works by logging out a message. Hi, I was clicked. It's a good practice to always test things before you start adding in lines and lines and lines of code, and then you go, hey, it worked, or it didn't. Little bits and pieces, so we can always verify if it's working before we get too complex in our code. With our click function working, what we need to do is to store a reference to what is being clicked on. So I'm going to create a variable. I'll call it clicked question. And I'm going to set it equal to e.current target. Remember, E is the event, and then the target of the event is our current target, so that would be the item that was clicked on. So that way we are able to store a reference to that element, because we will need to reference it multiple times through our code. Now I don't have to store it in a variable. I could just say e.currentTarget every time I'm trying to reference it later on in my code, but I personally find that tends to look messy and is harder to understand. There is some rationale to not make everything into a variable unless you need to, because when you make variables, you're now putting things in memory, and if your program or application has enough items in memory, you can start getting memory leaks or even run out of memory because it's trying to store too much stuff. But anything we're making, we're not putting enough stuff in it. Our machine will, our mouse will wear out clicking before it would ever run out of too many references to it. The next thing I need to do is to store a reference to the answer that ties to the question that was clicked on. So I will call that my clicked answer so that I know that they're kind of a match set. And that is going to be my clicked question. And JavaScript has a really cool thing where I can then say next element sibling. Now what next element sibling does is allow me to grab the next element after the one in my tree. And it's grabbing a sibling, not a child. And that's an important distinction because within our document object model, within the DOM, elements are referred to as siblings or parents and children. So if we look at the markup, I'll come back to the code in a moment. If I look at the markup, H2 and paragraph are children of section. But this paragraph is a sibling to my H2 because it's at the same hierarchy in my DOM tree. It's just the H2 comes first, the paragraph comes second, but they're siblings. So first child, second child, but they're both children of section. All of my sections are children of main, and then main is a sibling to H1, and H1 and main are both children of body. So if we think about our markup in this way of parent-child relationships in semantic HTML and start to build meaning in what we do, not only does our markup become easier to read, but when we're working with our JavaScript and CSS, it's much easier to maintain because there's a logic to what we're doing. Now, this next element sibling is the same as the jQuery next command. So it's giving us that same functionality. So when trying to convert from jQuery to vanilla JavaScript, it was a matter of searching for how can I find the next element the same way I do in jQuery, and a quick Google search turns up next element sibling. So if I say next element sibling, I'm in good shape. So now this gives me access to the question. This gives me access to the answer. We have access to the question clicked on. We have access to the answer that's associated with that question that was clicked on. The next thing we want to do is to figure out if that element is open. If it is, we want to close it. If it's not open yet, we want to open it. So to perform that, I'm just going to put a comment as to what this block is going to do. And that silly autocomplete. I'll get it right this time. There we go. So what we need to do is we need to find out if the question is currently open. So just to look back at the jQuery said, hey, if the current target, the question I clicked on, if the answer, now this would be our clicked answer, if the clicked answer is hidden, then we need to slide it down or make it visible. Else we slide it up. And then we took the thing we clicked on, we toggled the class to change between the cat and dog icon image. So we're going to use a similar kind of thing here, where we can then ask the question of if clicked question, if it's class list, if its class list contains close. So if its class list contains close, then we're going to, I'm just going to put a comment in here and say open. Actually, I'm going to do even better than that. We'll say slide down. Else, slide up. So we're using it similar to what we've done before. So if the class list contains close, then we need to make it visible. Otherwise, we need to make it go away. And then after that, then we take our clicked question and we set its class list to toggle close. So if the question is closed. Now going back to the markup, we'll see that the question has close on it. And much like what we did with jQuery, the questions had close on them. But then when we took close away, that allowed us to see an H2 without close. And going back into the CSS without close shows us puppies. With close on it shows us kittens. So we're taking advantage of, we only have to use one class instead of adding or subtracting two separate classes. We set a property on the tag itself, and then when we put a class on it, we change one of those properties. That's the logic that's happening in this instance. So going back into the markup, or into the JavaScript, so every time I click the button, I want to toggle that picture. So again, remember, try to only do small steps and then test your page. Make sure you're not getting error messages. And then if I click, I can see by clicking on the questions, they're indeed toggling the results. Now I'm going to modify this a little bit and look at my markup instead for a little while, because we can see there's the H2, it has close on it. And I can click and we can see how it left, it's back, goes away, comes back, goes away. So that toggling the question is giving us the result that we need. So in my click on function, the very last line is clicked question class list toggle close. We add and subtract the close class from it. To make the question slide down, or the answer slide down, I will just simply say clicked answer. And I'm going to set its style, its max height. I'm going to set it equal to my clicked answer scroll height. And then I do plus, and inside that plus, or after the plus, then inside quotation marks, I type in px for pixels, because we're setting it equal to a pixel value. So click to answer, the answer that I just clicked on, we grab its scroll height, we append to that .px. That gives us the value we need for setting the numerical value of the max height of our element. Final thing that we need to do is set clicked answer .style .opacity, and we will set that equal to 1. Now if I save this out, and go and click, we'll see the question. My headline I can click on. My question doesn't go away because I haven't put the slide up yet. Now the slide up is just going to be negating these values by setting them to 0. So I'll just paste those values in, but then change it, each one to a 0. Save that. So we're still setting the max height and opacity. And now I can click, it goes away, but I don't have it so only one question stays open at a time. If I want to adjust the speed of that animation, I go back in my CSS, I would modify that. If I want to change the easing, I would modify that. Those are all features that we can work on to adjust how our web page feels. To continue with fixing our project, we previously had, when we found out an answer, if it was hidden, then we were able to, we could go through all the answers and make things hide and show and do all of that. And it was really slick. With jQuery, it's a little bit shorter. I found it easier to break down what we're trying to do instead of these two lines of code. Each one of these, if we break it into a for each statement, so we take all the answers that aren't the one we clicked on and slide them up. We take all of the headlines that we didn't click on and we add close, but we're going to find out if it's the one we clicked on as well. So we first want to handle that before we then take care of the one that we did click on. So that's the order I'm preferring to do it right now. So I'm going to go through all of my answers, and we'll use for each again, and I will just grab each answer. Now this answer, this is just simply a variable name that I'm constructing right now. This is not referencing. Notice I'm not using, it's not in quotes, I'm not using a query or anything else. So it's just a variable name for each answer. Now when we looked at it up here, I changed it to item to show how it's not connected to this word answer, this class. So if having that too close of naming bothers you, then you can rename it. But I like, within my array of answers, I want to take each answer. That's how I want to go about doing this. So within that array, I want to then ask the question, if my answer, and SWER, if its class list contains closed. So if the class list of the answer that I clicked on contains closed, and the answer is not the clicked answer, then we need to do something. But it's actually, if the class list does not contain closed, we need this exclamation mark here. So if the class list of the answer, as it's going through each answer in my answers array, does not contain closed, that's with the exclamation mark here. It says not. Now if you don't want to put it there, then I guess, let's see, if the class list contains closed, we could, I guess, also say equals false if we didn't want to use not, but I think that now gets, I just prefer not, doesn't, negative. I think that's just easier to say. So if the answers class list contains closed is not true, thus the exclamation mark, and the answer is not the one I clicked on, then we need to make it go away. So then we can set its style max height equal to 0 and answer.style.opacity is equal to 0. doing this allows us to cycle through all of the answers in the answer array except the one we clicked on. And if they do not have closed in their class list, it now gets rid of their height and changes their opacity to 0. These properties are being animated, so then we get that slide up functionality. I click on the question, changes to puppy, click on it, goes back okay. If I click on the same question back and forth, that works. Now if I click on another question, the answer goes away, so we've now fixed that, but now they both have a puppy on them. Wait, then I click on the first one, and I just got puppy, or kitty back, but I didn't get the answer showing up. Click, oh, wait. So there's something amiss. And I think what we can do is look at what is happening a little bit by moving down the code and seeing when I clicked on the question, if the clicked question had close in it, then it showed me the answer, and then it toggled the question's class. But if I go here, where now when I'm going through the answers, and if I look at what is happening here, I'm only addressing answer, 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 answer. I'm not doing anything about the question. So an easy fix would be to do a very similar kind of thing and cycle through all of my questions, taking each question, and as long as the question is not the clicked question, then we can get rid of it. This is a little embarrassment in the code that I didn't need the if statement to make it happen, but we're going to roll forward with it and then see if we can clean things up even more. Now what we need to do is go through my questions and use a for each. For each is not the only way we can go through things. We could also use for of and a number of other array methods to cycle through all the elements in our arrays. We can do that. I just think that for each is part of modern JavaScript, and it's just a really elegant way to cycle through everything. So I think it looks better. So I'm going to encourage you to adopt it as part of your workflow. So for each question, if the question class list does not contain close, then we need to tell it to close. So I say does not contain by using the exclamation mark again. And we need to make sure that the question in question is not our clicked question. So if all of those things are true, then we tell our question to, let's try again, question class list to toggle close. So if the questions class list contains closed and the question is not the one we just clicked on, we toggle it closed, so that will close any open questions. And by toggling close, it adds and subtracts the closed class. The closed class adds to it the kitty icon. When we take away the kitty, we get to see the puppy. So by toggling the class, we get to make the class appear and disappear. And we can see that happen inside the element. When we look at that, we see currently an element has the classic close on it. When I click on it, something is wrong. Contains undefined 103. Whoops. So class list is fixed. Error message goes away. I click, I get a dog. Click again, it goes away. Click here. Now that one fixes itself. So now we have modified the code away from jQuery and use JavaScript to do it. So it's plain vanilla JavaScript.